This family is living in a time where a severe water shortage has destroyed the country, and the desperate struggle for survival is about to make their lives very complicated. In the future, the United States is experiencing a severe drought, which has caused wars to break out between entire states over water resources. People fight and kill each other over water. In this barren wasteland, a man named Ernest Holm does the job of delivering supplies like magazines and booze to the watermen, a government-backed group which holds total control over distributing the water extracted from deep wells. One day, Ernest is out for a delivery when he sees two men trying to break into a well that he uses for extracting water. He takes out his gun and fires a warning shot, but when the men try to shoot him, he has no choice but to kill them. His son Jerome arrives, and the two continue their delivery, carrying the supplies on a donkey. Next, they arrive to meet the watermen at a well, and Ernest warns Jerome to keep quiet during the transaction because these men are dangerous. While delivering the supplies, Ernest asks the men where the water from the well is going because it's not reaching his farm. The men tell him that the water is meant for industrial farms. Ernest insists that his land is fertile. It's just dry and needs water. The watermen tell him to mind his business and focus on delivering supplies. Where the water goes is their prerogative. Next, as Ernest and Jerome are going back home, their donkey falls, and Ernest sees that there is a severe wound in its leg. Realizing that the donkey will no longer be able to carry its own weight, let alone supplies, Ernest puts it down. Jerome cries and apologizes to his father for it, but Ernest says he should not apologize for this. The two arrive home, where Jerome's sister Mary lovingly serves him a paste which is supposed to taste like burger and fries. Ernest asks what's on the menu for him, and Mary does not seem to have a soft spot for him. While Mary washes the dishes with sand, Ernest tells her that they're going to see her mom tomorrow, but Mary tells him that she won't be joining. Later at night, while Ernest listens to the news on the radio, someone comes to pick Mary up on a motorcycle, and she sneaks out of the house and rides away before Ernest can stop her. The next morning, Ernest and Jerome arrive at an auction to purchase a robot carrier for their supplies to replace the donkey. A young man named Fleming bids against Ernest, causing him to bid way too high and go into debt. Next, Ernest and Jerome arrive to see Jerome's mother, Elizabeth. She's completely paralyzed, but there is a machine at the hospital which allows her complete physical ability when her family visits. Afterward, Ernest and Jerome arrive at the station to fill up on water out of what was previously a petrol pump. Ernest drinks some straight from the pump. There's a boy named Robbie standing there begging with his wife and newborn baby. Ernest tells him that he'll help him out as much as he can, but he needs to stop using his wife and baby as bait to get people to give him water. Robbie says that if things get any worse, he may have to consider selling his baby, and Ernest reprimands him strongly for this too. Jerome and Ernest return home, and Fleming arrives on a motorcycle. He asks to rent out Ernest's robot carrier. Ernest doesn't trust Fleming and says that if he can get a guarantee from his father, the man who sold the robot to Ernest, then he can take it. Fleming doesn't want to do that. He says he should be running Ernest's supply route because he can actually convince the watermen to irrigate this land. Ernest doesn't have what it takes. Ernest tells him if he wants the job, he can apply for it like everyone else. Fleming isn't happy. Before leaving angrily, he asks Ernest if he's even told his kids what he did to his wife back when he had a drinking problem. Ernest doesn't answer. The next day, Ernest and Jerome run their first supply route with the robot. Ernest tries to talk to the watermen about irrigating his land again, but they refuse him. Next, Ernest tells Jerome he's worried that Jerome has no friends or a girlfriend. He says he met a girl across the border and he told her about Jerome. She's interested. Jerome is hesitant, but Ernest tells him that he can't spend his life waiting around for the right person and the right moment to show up. If he feels something, if he wants something, then he should act. Waiting is a disease. Jerome understands. The father and son are driving when they see Fleming drive toward their home. Upon returning, Ernest talks to Mary and says that he doesn't want her dating Fleming anymore. She is outraged and doesn't understand why he would ask her to do something that will make her hate him. Why does he punish her for being happy? Ernest explains that it's not punishment, it's protection. She storms away. She asks Jerome for money so she can run away, but Ernest stops her. Enraged, she yells that Ernest is a failure of a man. He has failed his family. Ernest grabs a hammer and nails her window shut so she can't escape anymore. Afterward, he falls off the wagon and starts drinking again. The next morning, Jerome and Ernest discover that someone has broken in and stolen their robot. Ernest immediately suspects Fleming. He arrives at Fleming's house and meets his father. His father tells Ernest that Fleming is very passionate about irrigating this land and reviving it. Ernest casually asks if Fleming is around today, and his father mentions that he's got some supply route job, confirming Ernest's suspicion. Ernest arrives in the mountains to find Fleming, but ends up running into the watermen, who are incredibly angry that he hasn't brought their supplies. He ends up getting in a fight with one of them and almost gets killed, but he manages to grab his gun and escape. Next, Ernest finds Fleming sleeping and wakes him up with a gun to his face. He takes Fleming hostage and says that he is going to explain this whole situation to the watermen to make it right again. On the way, Fleming becomes thirsty and asks Ernest for some alcohol from his supplies. Ernest considers for a moment and then cuts him loose. The two sit down to drink. Fleming apologizes and says that it's just not fair that the land which belonged to his father was allotted to Ernest, who has no skills or money. It was allotted to Ernest simply because Fleming's father was from a different state. Fleming blames Ernest for the land running dry. During the conversation, Fleming also notices the knife of the waterman Caleb, who Ernest fought with. Ernest tells him to get up so they can continue walking, but he's too drunk to carry on, and Fleming takes advantage of the situation, knocking Ernest out with a rock and force-feeding him more alcohol to keep him quiet. Next, Fleming arrives to pick Mary up, and as Jerome sees her leave, he realizes something is not right. He goes out to look for his father. He arrives in the mountains where the men inform him that there has been an accident with the robot, and as a result, his father has passed away. After Ernest's funeral, Mary and Jerome arrive to see their mother at the hospital, and when they are leaving, Fleming arrives to pick them up. At home, Fleming sees Jerome trying to destroy the robot because he blames it for Ernest's death. Fleming tells him that he shouldn't let his grief turn into blame because blame is just a lazy person's way of making sense of the chaos of life. It would be very wise advice if he wasn't directly to blame for Ernest's death. He asks Jerome if he can take the robot on a supply run for a while and take a crack at trying to convince the watermen to irrigate this land. Jerome is against this idea, but then Fleming tells him that Mary is pregnant and he wants to do this for Jerome's future nephew or niece. Jerome agrees. Fleming arrives to meet the waterman Caleb and asks him to irrigate Ernest's land. Caleb refuses, but Fleming blackmails him, saying he was in a fight with Ernest the night he died, so he is the prime suspect for his death. Furthermore, he shows Caleb his knife and says that it was found with Ernest's body. Fearing a criminal investigation against him, Caleb agrees to run a water line to the land. Several months later, the water line is inaugurated, and the first thing Fleming does is take a shower with Mary, because of course he does. Next, it is revealed that the land is indeed fertile, as the months pass and healthy crops grow on it. Mary and Fleming end up getting married and building a happy life together, but as Fleming sees her being joyful, he can't help but think about what he did to her father. It is revealed that he tied Ernest's hand to the robot and made it drag him up the mountain. One day, Fleming's father arrives with representatives from the bank, and Fleming is enraged that he is discussing the future of his land without consulting him. His father says that the land is not his. Fleming says that the land belonged to Ernest, and since he married his daughter, it's his now. His father reveals that Ernest's land belongs to the bank. It was in foreclosure for years, but since no one wanted it, Ernest never moved. However, now that the land is irrigated, there are many interested parties. Fleming asks how much Ernest owed to the bank, and his father says that it's more money than he will ever be able to afford. Next, Fleming arrives to see Robbie and asks to borrow his baby, just so he can take it to the black market and get an idea of how much a baby sells for, because he is considering selling his and Mary's. Robbie and Fleming arrive at the market, but unbeknownst to Robbie, Fleming is actually selling his baby. Robbie is horrified when he learns this, but the buyer says that the deal is already done and he can't back out. He starts making a scene, and the buyer shoots him. They try to shoot Fleming too, but he runs away. However, the robot he took with him gets damaged in the process. Afterward, the robot restarts, and its default setting is restored. The default setting makes it walk back to its manufacturer. Fleming returns home and tells Mary and Jerome that he sold the robot to raise the money to buy the land back from the bank, but Jerome is suspicious. The robot returns to the manufacturer, who calls Ernest's home because his name is still on the license plate. Jerome picks up the call, and learning that the robot just wandered somewhere makes him even more suspicious. Next, Fleming sees Robbie's wife Susie sitting around holding a doll wrapped in a blanket and asks her why she's doing this. Distraught, Susie says that Robbie told her to do this until he came back so that people would not get suspicious. Jerome spots the two talking and sees a doll's leg sticking out of the blanket. Later, he tries to indirectly inquire Fleming about it, but he just gets angry and authoritative, treating Jerome like a child. Jerome decides to go across the border and meet with the robot's manufacturer himself. He's a minor, so that guards at the border don't let him through, but he runs into the girl that Ernest told him about earlier, named Anna, and she tells him that she can smuggle him across for the right price. After they get across the border, the two converse and bond. Jerome asks Anna if she remembers meeting Ernest Holm, but she says that she does not, and leaves. Next morning, Jerome meets with the manufacturer, and he shows him the footage from the robot. Through the footage, Jerome learns the truth about what Fleming did to Ernest. He is devastated. Upon returning home, instead of confronting Fleming, Jerome starts messing with him in little ways, like bringing the robot back and saying that it appeared on its own. He goes too far one night over dinner, as he says that he received a call from Robbie. Fleming, who knows that Robbie is dead, realizes that Jerome is up to something. Next day, Fleming receives a letter from Robbie saying he's alive and wants to meet. Now, Fleming truly starts to believe that Robbie survived. He arrives at the place where the letter asked him to come for the meeting, but he falls into a trap, and it is revealed that Jerome set the whole thing up to kill Fleming. Fleming begs for his life and pleads with Jerome to not do this. He tries every argument. He says that this will crush his sister and make her hate her own baby. He says that what happened with Ernest was an accident. Finally, he says that they need to stop this cycle of blame, and it ends with Jerome. At last, Jerome snaps and shoots Fleming in the head. Next, Jerome arrives home where Mary is worried sick that Fleming hasn't been home for 2 days. Jerome doesn't tell her the truth and just says that she should wait. She still sees him as a little boy to be looked after, so she just smiles and puts on a brave face for him, unaware of what he's done. Jerome decides to spare her the pain of finding out that her husband killed her father, so he erases the entire storage of the robot. Jerome and Mary sit down for lunch, and Mary sets out a third plate for Fleming, hoping he'll return. As she prays before starting her meal, Jerome glances at her, realizing the knowledge that he'll have to live with all alone for the rest of his life. The end. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like our channel and subscribe if you enjoy content like this. Also, let us know what movie you would love us to recap for you.